Let me go ahead and start recording. Irene, are you ready?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. HPH affiliate groups welcome everyone regardless of religious or non-religious background and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at all Helping Parents Heal meetings is voluntary. All discussions that take place at affiliate-led meetings are confidential. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Zoom meetings run by HPH leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with their children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. And again, welcome, Dr. van Lommel. Welcome, Mark. I'm going to quickly read Dr. van Lommel's bio and then pass it over to Mark. Pim van Lommel, MD, born in 1943, graduated in 1971 at the University of Utrecht and finished his specialization in cardiology in 1976. He worked from 1977 to 2003 as a cardiologist in Hospital Rijnstate, an 800 beds teaching hospital in Arnhem, the Netherlands, and is now doing full-time research on the mind-brain relation. He published several articles on cardiology, but since he started his research on near-death experiences in survivors of cardiac arrest in 1986, he is the author of over 20 articles, most of them in Dutch, one book, and many chapters about NDEs. He was co-founder of the Dutch IONS in 1988. In 2005, he was granted the Dr. Bruce Grayson Research Award of the International Association of Near-Death Studies. In 2006, the President of India awarded him the Lifetime Achievement Award at the World Congress on Clinical and Preventative Cardiology in New Delhi. His Dutch book, Endless Consciousness, was nominated for the Book of the Year in 2008 in the Netherlands. In 2010, he received the 2010 Book Award Van de Scientifique and Medical Network. And in 2017, he received the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Award by the Dutch Society of Volunteers in Palliative and Terminal Care. In 2020, the Spiritual Awakenings International honored him for his groundbreaking work about near-death experiences as Circle of Honor honoree. He was second place for the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies International Essay for the best scientific evidence about the possible continuity of consciousness after death for an article entitled The Continuity of Consciousness. He has had many other honors based on his incredible research and writing, which I will post on YouTube on the video. But for now, with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Pim van Lommel. Welcome, Dr. van Lommel.
Thank you very much for your kind words, your kind introduction.
So let's pass it over to Mark, who has questions for you.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth and Dr. Van Lommel. We did meet at the same conference that Elizabeth mentioned back in 2012 in Phoenix. It was called the International Conference on After-Death Communications. You were there, Dr. Evan Alexander was there, Larry Dossi was there, and some others. So it was a really great event, as I recall. I spoke there too. And also, I think you know Dr. Penny Sartori. She actually reviewed my first book, Soul Shift, for the Journal for Society of Psychical Research. So that was pretty cool. Very nice person, by the way. So I read your book, Consciousness Beyond Life, a number of years ago, enjoyed it very much, and have put together a few questions, some of which are, tied into what you have there, but also just to get your opinion and some feedback for other people. And I'm going to kind of start out with the background on, what really spurred your interest in NDE research and when did that take place?
Yeah. Well, as I write in my book also, that as a cardiologist, you have the privilege to attend cardiopulmonary resuscitations. And in 1968, just at the start of my rotating internship and the start of my specialization, cardiology, I was working as a young doctor in the coronary care unit of a hospital that was the third coronary care unit in the Netherlands. Before 1967, all patients died because modern techniques of resuscitation like electrical defibrillation and external chest compression were not yet possible. So in 1968, were the patients who died cardiac arrest, and we resuscitated him and had several cardiac shocks. And after about 4 minutes, he regained consciousness. And we, as a resuscitation team, were very happy. I was the doctor in charge, and it was all new for us. We were so happy because the patient was extremely disappointed that he was back. And he told me about going to a tunnel, seeing a light, hearing beautiful music, beautiful landscapes, beautiful colors, etc. I've never heard anything about near-death experience. Only Raymond Murray started the terminology near-death experience in 1975, but I did read his book as well, Life After Life. So it was all new for me, and I didn't do anything with it. I was a young doctor, I was starting my specialization. Until in 1986, I read a book by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, where he describes his very deep and extensive near-death experience as a medical student. He died in 1943 as a medical student because of double pneumonia. There were not antibiotics available, so he died, and his body was covered with a sheet. And a nurse was so upset that this medical student had died that he was able to persuade the doctor and to give him an injection from adrenaline right to his heart, but was quite uncommon in that time. After a period of clinical death of 9 minutes, he regained consciousness. And then the problem to find his body back because it was covered with a sheet, but he saw his hand with the fraternity ring, so he knew I must be there. And I was so impressed by this very deep near-death experience and the transformation it gave to him, that I just started out of curiosity to ask my patient who survived the cardiac arrest if they could remember something from the period of unconsciousness or the period of cardiac arrest. To my big surprise, within 2 years, out of 50 patients who had survived the cardiac arrest, 12 patients shared the NDE with me. It should be impossible, because I had always learned at university that consciousness is a product of brain function. But still, the majority of scientists, and especially neuroscientists, believe that this is true, but it is a never proven hypothesis. So I had learned that it was impossible to have an experience of consciousness, let alone an enhanced consciousness, the possibility of perception out and above your body, with cognition, with emotion, with memories from early childhood, from future events, etc. So because of the scientific curiosity, we started in the Netherlands with a prospective study in 10-day hospital in 1988. With 344 consecutive patients who survived the cardiac arrest. And combined with a longitudinal study with taped interviews after 2 and 8 years after the cardiac arrest, with a matched control group of patients who survived cardiac arrest without any memories. And our study was published in The Lancet in December 2001. After 10 years, it was a long-term study. And it gave a worldwide thrill. It was on the front page of all papers in the world. Because it was the first and still the biggest, the largest scientific research on the death experience in survival cardiac arrest. And what we found in our study is that there is no scientific explanation why people experience an NDE and a death experience. So lack of oxygen in the brain didn't play any role. So patients had a period of unconsciousness of 2 minutes or 8 minutes, didn't matter at all. And they had been unconscious for 5 minutes or 3 weeks in coma, didn't matter at all. So the severity of anoxia of the brain didn't matter at all. And also given medication or psychological explanation like fear of death didn't matter at all. Religion didn't matter at all. Age didn't matter at all. So the main conclusion was that there is no scientific explanation why only 18% of those survivors of cardiac arrest can mention a period of enhanced consciousness during cardiac arrest. And what we found in a longitudinal study, perhaps it's about the transformation, and we found that only patients with a death experience have the classical transformation. They lose the fear of death. I'm strongly convinced that there is an afterlife. They have a new insight what is important in life. It's about love and compassion and empathy, words towards yourself, accept your own negative aspects we all have, and accept and give love to others as well. And they feel connected with everybody and with everything. So they feel connected with other people, they feel connected with nature, they feel connected with planet Earth. The third aspect that they're always reluctant to talk about is enhanced intuitive sensitivity. So they know what other people feel and think. They have, they know about future events, have precognition. They have so a lot of aspects that you know that someone will die and he really will die. So it's quite disturbing for those people as well. And they receive much more information, not by the senses or not by the body. Well, it's a kind of
so it's opening something up new in them, apparently. For those who aren't that familiar with NDEs, can you share some of the most common elements that are experienced in NDEs?
Yeah. Well, there are two aspects. One of the aspects is what can be the cause of a near-death experience. So we did a study in cardiac arrest patients. So in the patient who had a severe medical situation, they all have been clinical dead, what means that they lose consciousness, and you have to start to initiate CPR within 5 to 10 minutes, otherwise the brain will be irreversible damage and all patients will die. So we look for patients who are in the first stage of dying. But other circumstances as well, and these are reported like in loss of blood, complicated childbirth in young women, near drowning in children, coma in traffic accident or cerebral hemorrhage. But also these kind of experiences are mentioned in existential crisis, severe depression, isolation, meditation, without any obvious reason. So you don't have these kind of experiences where the brain doesn't function. But what is important for us is that when you have cardiac arrest, there's no brain function left at all. And that is for the science very intuitive. Now, the common elements, the universal elements, is that first of all, they have the idea, well, is this death? I am dead now. And then they see their own body below, where people are busy with the resuscitation or with the surgery. And then at once they recognize the body as their own body, but they feel happy there at the ceiling. And then sometimes they come in a dark room, dark space, but can be sometimes frightening for them. About 50% of the patients have a frightening aspect of the NDE. And then they see a small light where they're attracted to that they describe as a tunnel experience. And then after the tunnel, they come in an otherworldly dimension with beautiful music, beautiful landscape, beautiful colors. They can meet deceased relatives. light beings, or the being of light, and usually this is the feeling of unconditional love and unlimited wisdom. And with this being of light, they have a life review. That means they relive their whole life from birth. And they feel connected with the consciousness of others in the past as well. When you took some plaything from your little sister when she was 5 years old, you feel how she felt at that very moment. So you're connected with the consciousness of others in the past as well. So it's not a film that you're looking at, but you relive it as well with a combination of the connection with the consciousness of others, and can have also future events, a flash forward. Then they can come to a border, and they know when they come to the border, when they pass it, they will not come back. And then usually they hear a voice from one of the deceased relatives, or just a voice. They say, it's not your time yet. There's still a task to fulfill. And then they come conscious back into their body, which is an awful experience because they're back in the body with all the limitations and pain, like in traffic accident, broken bones, etc. And they're feeling much too large. Their consciousness is too big for the sick body now. So they don't fit anymore in this body as well.
Skeptics often toss out unsubstantiated claims in an effort to dismiss NDE experiences. What are the most common claims they make, and how do you answer them?
Well, I usually don't answer them anymore. It's because people are skeptics and trying to debunk, usually don't know anything about it. They didn't read my book, they didn't read my articles. They're just full of what I call willful ignorance and prejudice. And they're just full of the materialist dogma. And they're afraid, they're frightened. They're frightened that they should be wrong. So my concept is that the brain doesn't produce consciousness. Consciousness is universal. Consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness is always there. And when you have a functional brain, you can receive just a small part of this consciousness, just a small part of the memories you have into your waking consciousness. But when the brain and the body is a kind of instrument, an interface, transceiver. And to understand, I always compare it with the internet. In the iCloud, there are 1 billion websites and YouTube films. And wherever you are in the world, in Australia, US, or Europe, you open your laptop and you can receive billions of websites from the internet, from the iCloud. But your laptop does not produce the iCloud. It's just perceiving it. And that's the same with your body. So you receive your consciousness, but you do not produce it. So your body and brain has a facilitating function and not a producing function of consciousness. And when this should be true, and I'm now about convinced that it is true. So there's a continuity of consciousness. Death is the end of our body, of a physical aspect, but not the end of our consciousness. Consciousness is eternal. It has no beginning, nor it has any end. And when it could be true, then most neuroscientists, philosophers are frightened that all what they have writing in articles, and they tell people in universities that they are wrong. So I understand they are fighting, and I understand that you try to fight the messenger, protect the messenger, not the message.
Yeah, I often think that the scientific materialism is so embedded in academia that the only major change that's going to take place over time is a grassroots effort from people like us, but we'll see. I was going to bring up your publication in the Lancet Medical Journal and just say that was a major achievement, giving that prevalence of scientific materialism or prevalence of physicalism as a theory. How did you break through that barrier, and did that really help open things up for NDE research moving forward?
I think when your study is published in the Lancet, which is one of the most important medical journals in the world, then you get attention. The people who are open are willing to start to think about it. I think the main aspect of what we did publish, and what I'm still publishing, also in my book, which is now been translated into 11 languages, is that according to our current materialist science, only that is true what we can objectify, what we can measure, what we can duplicate, what we can falsify, then it is true. But what you think and what you feel, so the content of your consciousness, you cannot objectify, you cannot measure, you cannot duplicate, you cannot falsify. So subjective experiences, which is the essence of who we are, is beyond our current materialist science. So we have to expand science into what we call the post-materialist science to include subjective experience. And that's what is happening now the last 10, 15 years. It's really because of studies on consciousness, it's changing now. But I think the most change will come from the general population. And when people are open and want to share their death experience or their after-death communication. Let's say after-death communication in the Netherlands, about 2 million people must have had this, and in Europe, about 125 million people must have had after-death communication. But they're silent about it because nobody will believe it. It's the same with near-death experience. More than 25 million people must have had a near-death experience, but usually they're silent. They're silent for years, 10, 20, 30 years, because nobody will believe it. So the more open the society will be, the more better we can listen to those people. It will change. The change will not come from science.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much, we're on the same page there. Look at our organization. When we met 10 years ago, we were just, Elizabeth and I were just getting started. I think we had one group, and today we have over, I believe, around 100 affiliates, 21,000 members, and growing faster than we can keep up with. So maybe the combined forces for frontier science for people like you and people like us together will push that over the push that rock forward.
But it's so important what you're doing with the organization as well. So you are opening the people, and you give the chance that people can share it with others, and that's how the change will come. So it's very important what you're doing.
Yeah. Back to NDEs, I think to me one of the strongest arguments for the validity of NDEs is the veridical information that comes back. And one of my favorite examples is Anita Morjani. Her body's in a coma, and she overhears a conversation between her doctor and her husband describing in detail her physical condition. And this actually happened well down the hall of the hospital, far from her body. So that would kind of, preclude any explanation of her overhearing, even if she was awake enough to hear. What are some of your favorites from your research that you can recall? Do you recall a couple that are really strong evidence?
Yes, they're really still. There have been a book now with the self does not die, but it's more than 100 cases of corroboration of critical perception. From our study, one of the main out-of-body experiences, but I love to share, is the case of the dentures. There was a 44-year-old man who was brought into hospital with coordinated care, where he was found in coma, unconscious in a meadow, about 30 minutes before he was brought into a hospital, and bystanders had tried to do some CPR. And when he came into a hospital, his body was cold, it was rather blue already, there was no circulation, no breathing. His pupils were wide and didn't react to light. So it was a very bad case, we said. So the first thing that the nurse did was to give him an intubation, which means that you can give him more oxygen. And he found out that he had dentures in the mouth. So he took off the upper dentures and put them somewhere on the crash cart, somewhere underneath. And they continued for CPR for about 1.5 hours because he was young, this man. And after 1.5 hours, he had blood pressure again, had heartbeat again, circulation. But he was still in deep coma and he needed artificial respiration. So he was transferred to the intensive care unit for another week for artificial respiration until he regained consciousness and was brought back to the cardiac ward. He was just brought back when the nurse came in for medication. And he saw the nurse and said, "You know where my dentures are?" And he told the nurse that he was brought into hospital, and the nurse took out his dentures and put it on the table with all these bottles, and then there was a slider underneath, and there he put his dentures. And the nurse was flabbergasted. And he could tell everything about this resuscitation room, that he could see from above how they were busy with his CPR. He could describe the nurses and doctors who were really busy with CPR. We could describe the room where he was brought into hospital in coma and was left in coma. And it could still describe the room into detail. And so it was very convincing that the nurse could indeed corroborate what the patient had said. So this is the case of the dentures. But there are many more intriguing cases as well.
Yeah, they'll have to read the book, right? They need to read the book.
There are many cases, and I think it's also what you tell. There could also be at other places in the hospital. They go with their ethereal body, or whatever you would call it, with the consciousness through walls. They can be in other places in the hospital where they can see and hear what is said. They can go when they think of a home, they will be at home as well, and see what the family is doing. So everything is happening at the same time as well. So when you have a 2 or 3 minutes cardiac arrest, you can tell for 1 week about what happened to you. Everything happens at the same moment. It's instantaneous. There's no time, no space. Sorry. So that's what we call the non-locality of consciousness. It's beyond time, beyond space, and everything is connected.
Outside of this dimensional reality that we recognize. You're probably familiar with this. I'm not sure. Maybe you work with Dr. Penny Sartori on her study where she compared the recollection of people who had a cardiac arrest and were revived that had an OBE versus those who did not have an out-of-body experience. I wondered if you could speak to that, the findings from that study.
Well, the same study was done by Saber many years before. He interviewed many patients who survived a cardiac arrest, and the patient with the cardiac arrest without any near-death experience just were missing a lot of details. The patient with the NDE, it is also the same what Penny Sartori found, that he could tell into details what had happened to the body and what had happened during CPR. It's a kind of objective proof for the subjective experience people had. So they could really tell what had happened to them. And it is different from what we always try to do is the hidden sign somewhere close to the ceiling, what we do in resuscitation rooms. And until now, Penny Sartori did it. We did it in the Netherlands, and also St. Party is doing it in New York, sorry, in the arrest study. And until now, nobody has seen this hidden sign, which for materialists, it makes them happy. But I always explained that also now in our body, what we perceive is depending on our intention and our attention. When you drive a car, you look over your iPhone. There are a lot of accidents happening because they say, I didn't see the car coming. So you need intention and attention to see what is happening, to perceive. And inattentional blindness is when you're out of your body, you see your own resuscitation, your body, you don't start to look around. There's somewhere in the room a hidden sign. You're not interested at all. So for me, the explanation that the hidden sign is not seen, perceived by people with NDE is the intentional blindness.
For those who are revived from a cardiac arrest and don't have an NDE, I've thought, well, maybe they actually had an experience, but they just don't remember it. Do you have any theories about that?
Yes, that's always a good question. That's one of the reasons we did the longitudinal study. We know from children who have an NDE under the age of 6, you usually don't remember the NDE, but you all have the transformation, especially the enhanced intuitive sensitivity. So different from other children, and they don't know why. And when you ask them, they had a complicated childbirth, had been in coma or meningitis, whatever, and they were just very small or a baby. What we found in our longitudinal study that only the patient with an NDE after cardiac arrest had this classical transformation, which means no fear of death anymore, new insight, what is important in life, and being connected with everybody else. So the experience of oneness, what they call it. And they still have the same feeling when they are back. They have to enhance intuitive sensitivity. What we found out also that when you had as a child, a younger age, an NDE, you have more often an NDE as an adult in cardiac arrest. You have been out before. You know, from women who have been sexually abused, they leave their body usually at that very moment. They have more often an NDE as an adult. And we also found that the mean age in our group of cardiac arrest patients was 62 years old, but when we looked at the patients under the age of 60, they had more NDEs than the older group. So the younger the age, the more NDEs are reported. There's one prospective study in children that they report 70% of NDE in critical medical situations. Where you have the retrospective studies, the patients usually cardiac arrest or whatever. Traffic accident, whatever, this kind of things. With the mean age of 35 to 45 is about 30 to 40% NDE. We found 80%. So I think the NDE can happen when you leave your body. And everybody will have a death experience when they die. But when you're older, it takes more time to get out. So when you're resuscitated between 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, a lot of people are still fixed in the body. When you're a child at the age of 4, you're so much more open. You receive a lot of information. They're not yet prepared. They don't have the materials helmet on it. They receive much more. And when you're older, the connection between consciousness and the body and the brain is so strict that you need more time, perhaps 30 minutes or an hour before you're out of your body. But I'm sure everybody will have a death experience. So we know it because of the after-death communication. When you meet the consciousness of deceased relative, you know now for sure that consciousness is still there. You can communicate with them, you can see them, you can hear them, you can smell them, you can communicate with them. So it's a kind of subjective proof that consciousness is still there.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. The longer you're in this body, the more you think the body is you. Even though those of us here probably know that's not the case, but you still get so used to this physiological machine and feeling like this is me, you know?
They are their body.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
You know that you have a body.
There you go.
Our consciousness and you have a body.
Yeah. For this audience, I suspect that one of the most touching parts of the NDE would be the reuniting with deceased loved ones, and probably also the presence of the being of light that some perceive as God, a divinity, Jesus, or another spiritual master. Can you speak about those two parts of the NDE?
Yeah. Well, one of the most emotional aspects, as you call it, is meeting deceased relatives, and especially meeting deceased children. I also know stories that Boomer had an NDE met a younger boy who died as a baby several years before she was born, and then parents never told her. Then when she came back, she said there was a boy. He said he was my brother, and then the parents had to admit that she indeed had a brother who died several years before she was born. So these kind of subjective experiences are very important, and it is. But also, you can meet grandparents you have never met before, and when you are back, you see pictures. You say, "Oh, that's the woman or the man I met in my NDE." But the most important aspect, as well as the being of light, which is just the feeling of unconditional love, acceptance, unlimited wisdom. You feel totally safe and accepted, and that's the feeling people miss when they are back in the body.
And that probably ties into the transformative effects that a lot of NDEers feel after they come back.
Yes, it's when they are back in the body, they say this physical world is just an illusion. Where I was is more real than real. That's the real world for me now. That's where I come from. That's my home, is capitals.
Do those transformative effects last long in general? Typically last long?
Lifelong. They're lifelong. And the problem is first that most NDEs are positive, quite content. but the people cannot share it with others. So when you start to talk with your doctor, you say the total nonsense, hallucination, you get some medication. When you try to share it with family members, with a partner, they don't believe you. 70% gets a divorce because the partner is not the same person as I'm married before. So you're totally different. But when you cannot share it with others, you can hardly accept it yourself, even though know that the experience you had is called a near-death experience. So you're lonely, you're depressed, you're homesick, and it can take years, many years, before you find someone who is open and is able to listen. Then you can start to accept it. I mean, you can accept your experience, you can start to integrate it. Once we did a study in 82 patients who had an NDE in the past in the Netherlands, with a mean interval of 24 years, so between 7 months and 70 years. The mean age interval was 24 years. And still, 50% of those patients were not able to share their NDE with others after a mean interval of 24 years. So they are silent. And so it's still a problem. And you don't accept it, you don't integrate it, and you really don't change as you do when you accept and integrate your experience. So it's very hard. It's a spiritual trauma. And it's not just fun. It's really hard work to get it accepted and integrated into your life.
You come back with this life-changing experience and find no one wants to hear about it, or they're so indoctrinated in the cultural aspects of their upbringing and they're not willing to change or consider something different. It's probably a really difficult thing.
And I feel the same with all those parents you have in your groups, and they lost a child and they still have maybe contact with the deceased child. Nobody will believe them. And that's why it is so important what you are doing, to be open and to accept and then accept these kind of stories. And when you ask them and they know that you're open, you will hear so many more stories. That's what I had as well. I once gave a lecture for 80 parents who lost their child by murder, or they were just disappeared when traveling around the world. And they were just full of grief when I started my lecture. But at the end of the lecture, one parent started to tell about that the moment her child was murdered, she had contact with her by telephone call or by music started, the favorite music. And then other parents started to share the experience. And at the end of the evening, everybody was sharing the afterdeath of shared that experience they have had. So the atmosphere changed intense in positive way.
One of the parents just sent a question by chat that I recognize, and I know that it's been dismissed and overcome. It doesn't answer it. It's probably from Michael Shermer's group, but she says, I heard a theory that NDEs are caused by a release of DMT by the brain. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is some dimethyltryptamine DMT in the epiphyse of the brain. It's a very small amount, and the half time is seconds. So it disappeared within seconds. So the biological explanation by DMT in the body, it's also in the liver a little bit, doesn't fit with the clinical findings. But we also know that when you use ayahuasca, sometimes people can have an experience with enhanced consciousness. But these experiences are not the same as NDEs. You usually don't meet deceased relatives. They don't have an out-of-body experience with theoretical perceptions. You hardly ever meet a being of light or a border. But when they have a deep experience of enhanced consciousness and they have a transformation afterwards, then they change as well. But I don't think that psilocybin or LSD or DMT is the explanation. What was intriguing, and there have been studies done with neuroimaging with people using DMT or LSD or psilocybin, and what we see is that parts of the brain are less active. This is a paradox of enhanced consciousness they experience. And in near-death experience, in cardiac arrest, we know there is no brain function at all. So there are no body reflexes, which is a function of the cortex. There are no brainstem reflexes, the gag reflex, corneal reflex is gone. The people are unconscious, there is no breathing, the breathing center is close to the brainstem, and the electrical activation of the cortex, the EEG, is flatlined between 10 or 20 seconds. And there's nobody ever been successfully resuscitated within 20 seconds. So all the patients, and also the other, there have been 4 studies with NDE studies in survivors of cardiac arrest, with a total of 562 survivors of cardiac arrest. They all must have had a flatline EEG, and still about between 15 and 25% of those patients had a near-death experience, which should be impossible because the brain doesn't function.
It's interesting too, because in some of the research that's done on spiritual mediums who say they can contact or communicate or receive communication with deceased or discarnate people, that the studies shown, the ones I'm aware of, that brain activity goes way down to whereas they expected it to go up. So
Exactly.
it tells you it's not a brain function thing, it's something beyond that.
The functioning brain is limiting these kind of experiences. So the threshold of consciousness must be lower. And that's also a lot of after-death communication happens in the sleep, during sleep, because when you sleep, the threshold of your consciousness, you can receive much more than when you're awake. And there's still a huge problem to receive more information.
So now that there's so many people researching this, do you collaborate with some of the others like Dr. Bruce Grayson, Jeffrey Long, Penny Sartori, Sam Parnia, Eben Alexander, and Michael Sabam?
I've met them all, they're all good friends.
Okay.
I didn't, yeah, so I know them. I know them from all those conferences where we all come. And you know, the intriguing thing is that all those people who, scientists who do research in NDE, but also scientists who do research in reincarnation or do research in after-death communication, all have their meaning. They are convinced that there's a continuity of consciousness, that consciousness is not a product of the brain. It is impossible that consciousness is a product of the brain. And so it's important that we meet each other and we have write books and give a lecture about it, because again, the change will come from the general population, not from science.
Yeah. But you do give us a lot of things to consider and that help us understand better and to, you know, validate it to us, which is very important. I'm done with my questions. I was just going to go to the chat board here because we've got about 15 minutes left and ask some of the ones the parents have posed. This one's speculative, but maybe you've got some data on this. It says, it would seem that a young child who had an NDE would not fear death. Is that right? Question mark.
Yes, that they have an has to do with sensitivity. They hate loud noises. They love classical music. They love nature. They love silence. They don't play with other children. They look to other children. They're on their own. They can have a problem when they're 50, 60, 70 years old. They can be depressed or even thoughts about suicide, and then later disappeared. And it is just about hope sickness. They don't fear death at all because they know that death is not the end. Another thing perhaps is interesting, that I know quite a lot of stories that young children who die have premonitions, that a week before they die or a day before they die, they ask the parents, what is death? What does it mean, death? What happened when you die, etc. And then several days later, they die in a traffic accident, or they die acute in meningitis or something severe disease. And they knew it because we know the questions they ask. They had premonitions. Children can have so many premonitions that about upcoming death that they don't put it into words, just ask questions to their parents.
Next one is what, and this again asks you to speculate, but what do you think about the death experience of someone who dies traumatically? Are they outside watching themselves die, therefore maybe not suffering?
Well, suffering is mostly the physical aspect of your process of dying. So when you're dying, it can be suffering as well, physically. But the moment you're out of your body, they're so happy. And you have a lot of people who have the end of life experiences when they are in the process of dying. They get out of the body and meet their deceased relatives, see being of light, of beautiful landscapes. And they don't fear death anymore after these kind of experiences, because they know that you're not your body, and that consciousness will continue in a wonderful realm with love and light.
Great. Someone else is asking about the difference between out-of-body experiences and NDEs, wanting to know what are the similarities of those two phenomena, other than, you know, just being aware of being outside of their body.
Now, I think about 10% of young adults can have spontaneous out-of-body experience at the moment between awake and sleep. Then they get out of the body and see in their sleeping room their own body in bed. So it can happen without any medical or problematic reason. But in an NDE, it's a kind of proof where you have corroboration of physical perception, that you can prove that consciousness was really out of the body and that you're not your body, and that there's a continuity of consciousness. So it also indeed can happen, an out-of-body experience, in natural circumstances. Also hypnagogia, you can have out-of-body experiences. Meditation, sometimes you're not feeling your body. But what I call an out-of-body experience is where you have perception out and above your body. There have been some publication by neurologist Olaf Blanke and some others who say you can induce an out-of-body experience by stimulating some parts of the brain. But it has never been an out-of-body experience. It will also be the illusion to being out of the body. No patient they describe had ever had a perception out and above the body, which could be corroborated. They just have the illusion to be out of the body, which is different. An illusion is something different from a real out-of-body experience.
So that type that's induced by some brain stimuli, they probably are unable to provide veridical information, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Nothing. It's just an illusion. They have the feeling that they're out of the body, but there's no out-of-body perception. The problem is that in the title of the studies, they call it an out-of-body experience, and sometimes they call it an illusion as well. But it is an illusion.
Yeah. This one I know the answer to, because I know that NDEs are all different and some aspects of them are in some and not in others. But the question is, do all patients who had NDEs experience the being of light and unconditional love?
No, not everybody has experienced all the elements. I think when you have all the elements, we are talking about a very deep experience. So we have people who just meet deceased relatives, but not a being of light. But when you have a deep experience, you don't meet the being of light. You have feeling of unconditional love. But also, you have only experienced some elements of the NDE. You still have your homesickness and your feeling of loneliness and depression, because it was so beautiful there.
And that ties into the next question. What do NDEers say about returning to their bodies after their consciousness have been expanded and if they've seen light and surrounded by beautiful landscapes? Who decides they should return, them or a higher, which is a higher force or love?
Yeah.
Not clear on what they asked, but
they never want to go back to the body. They want to stay there. It's their home. It's love. It's wonderful there. So they're forced to come back because a voice tells them it's not your time yet. You have still a task to fulfill, and the voice can be from somewhere else. Sometimes it's the being of light. Sometimes it's one of the deceased relatives. Sometimes it's a light being who's telling you it's not your time yet. And they're always disappointed that they have to come back, always. And then coming back to your body is really awful for them.
don't some come back out of a sense of obligation for their children or something they haven't finished, even though they don't really want to leave?
They usually say, I'm sorry. Young mother said, I'm so sorry that I didn't think of my baby and my husband and my other children. I was so happy there. And now I feel guilty that I didn't think of them.
Let's see here. Here's one that said, I have experienced an NDE and out-of-body experiences. The out-of-body was frightening, very different. But that might be what tied into what you talked about earlier, where sometimes you go through these stages before you get to the light.
Yeah, about 50% of patients who have a positive near-death experience have a moment of fear in the dark space, and sometimes you even go down, and they call it the frightening experience of hellish experiences. Perhaps 1 or 2%. We don't know the exact number because people with a positive NDE are always already reluctant to share it with others. When you have a frightening NDE, you're far more reluctant because you're feeling guilty that you have been there, like in the Dante tells in the Divine Comedy. It's people can experience these kind of hellish experiences as well. But it is rather rare, and we don't know the exact number.
And it seems like a lot of the ones that had a negative experience in their NDE, it didn't last for the whole NDE. It was just like the beginning part, maybe. And perhaps it was tied into their own self-loathing or feelings of guilt, or that they weren't deserving. And then the NDE sometimes shifted, at least that's what I've read, into a more positive experience. Have you got any background on that?
Yeah, it's what I said. About 50% have an aspect of fear, and then they continue, but sometimes they don't continue. And then they stay in this place of fear and being back, feeling of guilt as well. So it's hard for them to share with others. But even with a writing NDE, when you find somebody who is open and can listen, it will change your insight as well. But it is far more hard work for them as well. There have been some books and articles written about it by Irons.
Another person is asking the following, and this is asking you to speculate. Whoops, it went away. Oh, do you feel that the soul leaves the body before actual death? In other words, the body is not suffering because consciousness has left the body.
I always ask people, where is your body? Where is your consciousness when you are asleep? You don't experience consciousness, but its consciousness is still there, but you don't experience it in your body when you're asleep. And when you're in general anesthesia, you don't experience your body. And when your body is, let's say, not functioning anymore, especially your brain, you're out of your body. And also in the process of dying, you can have the end-of-life experience of deathbed visions where you don't feel your body anymore, but you're out as well. So it can happen under many circumstances. I don't know exactly what the moment of death is, because death is a process. Death is not a moment. And it will take hours, some people to die. And what the real moment of death is, because when you die, when you are declared death, there's still many cells in your body are functioning. Also, there have been brain studies done 10 days after death, and there are still brain cells, neurons, who you can find living as well, and find them back, and also in your body. So when your body as a whole doesn't function anymore, it's irreversible damage. The system is damaged, but not all cells are dead. It will take. And we also know that usually in the Christianity and other cultures as well, we leave the body 3 days at rest, because a lot of information and energy is leaving the body in the first days after what we call death. But there's still a lot of activity in the body as well. But energy and information is leaving the body.
This one is, this ties, I guess, into a theory of consciousness, which to me is not physical, it's primary, but the question is as follows. Is non-local consciousness considered magnetic waves? Does it live with us forever?
Now, first of all, I think magnetic waves, as we have the electrical activity, which is also magnetic activity in the brain and in the body and in the heart, is a product of consciousness. Everything what we see in our physical world is a product of consciousness, because consciousness is fundamental, and everything comes from consciousness. Your body comes from consciousness. What's the function of your body is produced by consciousness. Electromagnetic energy is produced by your body, but the origin is consciousness. So it's very interesting that some people who have had an NDE are very emotional. That sometimes the computer doesn't work, or light bulbs go off, or your watch, you cannot wear a watch because the watch doesn't function on the body. So you can have a lot of electromagnetic energy which disturbs other instruments as well. When you're emotional, the car won't start. So, but still, it's a product, result of consciousness, and not the other way around.
Yeah, I guess the observer effect in quantum mechanics kind of validates that, does it not? Yeah. This one's a little bit different. It says, I had a very unusual experience where myself and another person switched bodies. Afterwards, I entered her body and she was in mine. It was spontaneous and felt very spiritual. It was quick and we were both in shock. I had an NDE as a child, and this was not similar in any way. Have you got any explanation for this?
No, I don't have an explanation. The only thing is that you're not your body, you're your consciousness. And I know that from Himalayan masters, I've been meditating for years and years. They can be at two places at the same moment, and somebody will see his body somewhere else, 1,000 miles away. So there are things that we cannot explain. But I cannot exclude the possibility that you're in another body. Like also that we sometimes have xenoglassia, that means that when you come back out of coma, that you speak in another language we have never learned before. So there must be contact with some aspects in the non-local consciousness where you can have access to this kind of languages as well.
We're down to 2 minutes. I'll try and squeeze in one, maybe two more. This one is more of a comment. It says, my NDE was always hard to describe in words, but it was blissful perfection.
Well, NDE is an ineffable experience. There are no words for it. So you try to find words from your own education, your own religion, your own culture. A child will use different words as an adult, and a Christian will use different words as a Muslim or atheist. But the most difficult problem is there are no words for it. It's an ineffable experience.
So I'll squeeze in this last one. This is more mystical. She says, it's a speculative question, but if you were to guess, based on your research, what do you think happens to our personal consciousness after death? What does it experience? Does it merge with the universal consciousness? Does it retain its subjectivity?
Both. I mean, it's both. You're connected with everything else. So you're like the wave in the ocean. But the other way, when you have post-mortal or after-death communication, they are in contact with a personal aspect of consciousness as well, but you still kept it. I don't know how long this personal aspect will last. If it will be years. And the other realm has no time and no space. So the worldly idea of time is different from where they are there.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour. I just want to thank you, Dr. van Lommel. It's been a privilege to talk to you, and I'll turn it back over to Elizabeth to put a wrap on the meeting.
Thank you. You have good questions.
That was wonderful. And I'm so glad that you had time to answer some of the questions from the parents, and they were very good questions too. And I hope that that you enjoyed being with us as much as we enjoyed being with you. I know that it's very late over there, and well, thank you. And at the end of these meetings, we always ask the people who are on the meeting to unmute and say thank you and goodbye to you, if that's okay. So we're going to ask everyone to go ahead and unmute And
Thank
and
you so
again,
much.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gwen.
Thank
Thank you.
Ian's
Thank
mom
you
for
very much.
Thanks, doctor.
Thank you.
got a lot out of it. Thank you.
Enjoy.
that was wonderful.
Love listening. Thank you
I
so
see
much.
Anna Marina also.
Thank you all, and we will see you again. There's a meeting for Helping Parents
Thank
Heal
you.
Colorado that I'm stepping in for this afternoon if anybody wants to join me, but I will talk to
Dr. Kim, see you in Spain, Madrid, Barcelona.
Thank
Again
you
in
for
Barcelona.
inviting us. That was